Oh wow, no countdown. All right. Hello everyone. This is the Men of Steel Superman chat. Uh, let's introduce our panelists here. We have to my left the always impressive Oddfellows Thoughts. I'm sure you all know him. Say hello.
Hey, comic book friends, how's it going?
Good. And of course, the man of the hour, the one who is starting another great comic book community project of All Star Superman is Sleepy Reader.
I get all my inspiration from Agent 42Q,
God
for
rest
those who
his
remember
soul.
who he is. God rest his poor, tainted soul.
Yeah.
Hallowed be thy name. And the idea here is for us to try to talk Superman. And I say try because none of us are really die-hard Superman fans.
Yeah,
Not-
where's Reedham Stephen when
Not even close. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I've spent the last day doubling the amount of Superman I've read in my life to try to prepare.
So you've read 4 comics? Is that what you're saying?
Uh, a bit more. Um, but yeah, I guess we should start with like when you guys.
I've read a lot of Superman over the years, just never like consecutively always reading Superman, but I've sampled him a million different times.
Yeah. My experience with Superman is since John Byrne's run of Man of Steel. That's the first new Superman book that came around when I started really reading comic books, and from that point on, I have tried a smattering of every time a new Superman book comes out. I will buy the first couple issues to kind of see what it's like. When the New 52 started, I didn't get Grant Morrison's Action Comics, but I did try George Perez's Superman when it first started. So that's kind of my experience with it. Nothing's ever really taken. Nothing's ever really grasped my imagination for me to continue on a long run of Superman. Now, I have bought bits and pieces over time. Most of my Superman reading experience is Superman with other people. It'd be Batman and Superman. I read that for a while. I enjoyed some of that. Or it's always Superman, teamed up with somebody else. It's never just a Superman story. Short of course, this event you guys got going on with the All-Star Superman. That's kind of its own thing in my head. So.
Oh yeah, it stands alone and it stands apart in so many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I guess you're talking about that Byrne, and that's the
Man of Steel, I think is what it was called.
Yeah, Man of Steel. That wasn't just a reboot. That was like the reboot, like
right.
the core of what.
That was a major reboot at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that was that was just post-Crisis, so they were really trying to sure that up.
Right. I remember it being a big deal. I remember it being a big deal at the time. My friends were Superman fans. I'm trying to think what Superman. Adventures of Superman? Adventures of Superboy? Was there Adventures of Superman at one point?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
They were big readers of that. I would read their copies, so I keep up on Superman as far as that kind of stuff goes. Had lots of old copies, so we read old copies of that and whatnot. And I remember when the Byrne thing came out, it being a big deal. I was a Byrne fan at the time, and it was gonna this change in Superman was gonna be this big thing and whatnot. So I jumped on for that. I think I was on for like 5 issues before I decided that my young teenage brain had better things to read than Superman. But
Oh wow.
Yeah, I've gone back and read it actually for one of your parfaits.
All right.
And thought it was much better than I remembered.
uh-huh.
It was actually very good. I think I was still too much of a Marvel guy at the time that it came out, and I wanted John Byrne to really Marvelize Superman, which he didn't really try to do.
No.
He tried to stay within the Superman world, but just reimagine it. it seems like every rebooting of Superman they try to depower him a bit, or most rebootings of Superman, and they definitely did that then. But somehow, I don't understand why his powers keep creeping back. Because I know they had Denny O'Neil depower him at one point in the late '60s.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if part of it is, I guess in my head, Superman is the ultimate power. I mean, he's, the closest to God or whatever however you want to put that. I mean, he's completely invulnerable, all this stuff, is he faster than the Flash, all of that kind of stuff. So I think part of that, they depower him thinking, okay, we're going to take his powers away so we can tell a more challenging story, because obviously if he isn't uber powered, he can be more easily challenged by the bad guys, right? But I think they keep bringing the powers back in because in all of our heads, ultimately, Superman is the ultimate power, right? He is, or at least in my head anyway,
right.
He's the strongest, fastest, toughest, whatever out there, and so I think that's why the power keeps escalating back in. I would be curious, because I don't know the history of Superman really that well. I'd be curious to know, because obviously he didn't start out having all these powers, right?
He couldn't fly.
He jumped,
I don't think
right?
he had all the X-ray vision and stuff.
He was basically just really strong, right? Really strong and fast, so he could leap tall buildings. And then somewhere along the way he started flying and all this other stuff. Who made those decisions? I'm assuming that wasn't Schuster and.
I think they made some of those decisions. I think what happened. I mean, we're talking about the early days of comics, right?
Right.
I think the time a writer came along and had a story to tell, if they needed a new power, they just made it up and threw it in. And my understanding is a lot of stuff very early on he got turned into a radio show, and a lot of stuff got added on the radio show. I know Kryptonite came from the radio show, and a bunch of other things.
I think Olsen came from the radio show as well.
Probably, yeah.
That's interesting.
And so, and there was a comic strip in the newspaper that happened very shortly after, like within a year, also. And different writers there were adding in stuff, and eventually, they just kept incorporating everything. Someone could have made it as there was no one probably making decisions at the time, but
right.
But I still don't fully understand why every time they try to depower them, it goes back up. I don't, because I think it is kind of a big problem. Although Grant Morrison doesn't have a problem with it when he wrote it in All-Star Superman.
Well, he wrote it in too, in a way that works.
Right.
But I was going to say this about Superman, because I was looking a little bit into it. Compared to pretty much any other the characters we normally talk about, most of the mythos and ideas that we find very iconic about the character really came after the initial setup, and mostly came from other multimedia. A lot of it came from the TV show and the serials and the radio, and then it was incorporated into the comics. And more than most characters, like when the movies happened and whatnot, they really tried to gear the comics for and around that. And it feels like the comics of Superman were always just kind of things going on, rarely have kind of a momentum of their own.
Maybe he was raised too early by the larger culture, being the first superhero, and he didn't have a chance. I don't know.
I just think it's interesting, because of course, we're talking about the fact that the key things that we think are, the ingrained stuff about Superman, large portions of that were built by other medias, and then it got incorporated into the comic books. And how much time, at least I spend a good chunk of time, crying right now over all these other medias influencing and changing our heroes.
Right.
That's really interesting. It's an interesting concept, because I don't know that I would be interested in reading that early Superman.
Well, I have read some early Superman recently. Not a whole lot, because it gets boring pretty quickly.
Right.
But from the very early Simon and Schuster, not Simon and Schuster, right? Schuster and someone. And what I noticed was, everyone points out, or maybe Grant Morrison's got everyone pointing out, that when he started out, he was trying to right social wrongs.
Right.
And he fights corrupt bankers and people running casinos and other things that hurt the little person. But the other thing is, it's always this fantasy of beating up the bullies. So I feel like that was probably a big part of Simon and Schuster's motivations. You know, the fantasy of, you think you can pick on me, but bullets bounce off of me, whatever you try.
Right.
And he bullies them back. He terrifies them. He hangs them by their feet and makes the bullets bounce back at them and things like that.
Well, I think in the old serials, Superman was a lot more brutal. Like, some criminals are trying to get away in a car, and he'd, like, rip off the door and throw them off a cliff or something. It wasn't this noble thing. Kind of like Batman with a gun.
Right. All the heroes back then were that way. It was, I mean, before, obviously, the Comic Code Authority and who was really reading the books and whatnot, they were pretty brutal as far as, most of the heroes,
Maybe more like Westerns, too. Western heroes are okay with shooting bad guys. And being really mean to the bad guys.
Yeah.
I feel like Superman found a sense of honor, though, before the Comics Code Authority came around.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it was a Mark Waid introduction to one of the books I was reading. He's saying that, like, right after World War II, Superman became...
he predates World War II. How many superheroes can say that?
Right. But after World War II is when they made him kind of this cozy figure, because they felt like he... at that point, they were feeling he was supposed to represent America, according to Mark Waid, and America was trying to be kind of this patriarchal country that was taking care of the rest of the world in the post-World War II.
Well, didn't somewhere along
America
there...
in 1939 was still more in touch with its Wild West and the Depression and kind of a rougher unions versus the bosses kind of world.
Right.
I'm sorry, Travis.
Well, no, that's right. And then like the after World War II, going into the 50s and communism started to become somewhere in there. Isn't that where they coined the whole truth, justice, and the American way?
Yes.
Isn't that when that got?
You're not telling me that came from the TV show, or
was it Carlos?
Maybe Carlos told me that.
I think I saw you and Carlos talking about it some on. Yeah. So, when was that TV show?
Carlos on.
But that TV show was in the 50s, right?
Yeah, it was in the 50s.
And see, that for me, I'm going to sound like a very unpatriotic person. That was always one of the turnoffs for me as a kid about Superman, because I always remember hearing that, and I always thought Superman should represent something more than just America, and it seemed like America kind of stole him for a while, even though obviously he's always been an American superhero. It's not like that, but I always see him as being more of a global humanitarian, and then that's how they use him now. That's how they use him now, but I don't know. It just kind of...
Right.
Well, I actually kind of want to dive into that a little bit, because we're three guys sitting here talking about Superman. We're not the big Superman readers. I mean, I don't dislike Superman, but what do you guys feel it is that keeps you from picking up Superman? Monthly or semi-regularly, or however you think you would.
Well, I've tried every Superman comic in the New 52, and now monthly pick up Adventures of Superman. I like Superman, I think, when writers catch him correctly, and that and I wasn't reading many DC comics before the New 52, in the 2000s, but it seems like in the New 52, they, maybe because of the mandate to be grim and gritty, they didn't know what to do with Superman. And one of the best portrayals of Superman, like recently in Adventures of Superman, which is the out of continuity, nothing to do with New 52 series, was by Joe Keatinge, where he shows Superman as like the uber optimist. Whatever the situation is, Superman is, in his story, working towards the better future, working towards what's going to, okay, we had a little problem here, I'm going to fix it. Okay, here goes the next thing. And the story shows him going all the way through to the heat death of the universe as an optimist. And even then saves the day and finds some humans to push them on through to the next universe. And so it's like an immortal Superman as super optimist, and I thought that was a really good take on him, although having nothing to do with that 1939 Superman, I suppose. But.
And that's exactly what I guess I don't care for about Superman, because that's how I see Superman. I see Superman as being this very light, this very not light as in a joke, but I mean this very extremely positive, gung ho for the good. I don't know exactly, and that to me, that's just has never appealed to me. I guess that's why Batman appeals to me more, because Batman's more of a cynic, and I guess I'm a cynic, and so that that's the only thing I can think of. I mean, because trust me, I read comics for a lot of years, and so I always wonder, well, what is it about these iconic characters that doesn't appeal to me, and that I don't know what else it is other than that. And for me, it's not, well, he's just this uber god, so you can't tell an interesting story with him being super powerful. Well, that's ridiculous. Of course you can, because you can find villains that are just as maniacal or counter to whatever he is, that would make them evil or whatever. But I have to admit, the stories I like best of Superman are either play with that, his wholesomeness in some fashion or another, or or occasionally where he questions why he's doing what he's doing, or if he's really set up to be this. The level of responsibility that he carries on his shoulders is crazy, right? I mean, because he basically feels he's responsible for the world and literally everything in it. Lots of times they tell stories of him literally being concerned about saving, dogs and cats that are stuck in trees and all this kind of stuff. Down to that level, he seems concerned with the planet Earth and everything on it. And so those stories interest me when they play with that.
But see, there's a problem of making him so superpowered, because if he wants to do good and his powers are so limitless, then his responsibilities are too big and he becomes like God or something.
I argue that. I would argue that implicitly, because all the best Superman stories deal with that head on. If you look at what's considered the best Superman stories of all time, all of them deal with that concept. All-Star Superman clearly is dealing with that.
Well, All-Star Superman proves or disproves all of these points. He's an optimist, he's superpowered, and it's somehow a really good story.
Somehow.
It's almost, if you find the right contrast for his super optimism and his superpower, then you have
there's a story that deals with that head on too, because I don't know if you guys have read What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way. It's my favorite Superman story. It's a Joe Kelly story, so represent. But the whole point of that is he's taking on an analog of the Authority. And at that time, that sort of stuff was really big, and it tackles that thing, like the whole morality idea of that. These guys are killing villains and being done with it. Superman does not kill. Tackling that head on, making that relevant, making a story around that level of responsibility is what elevated this story to be remembered on, any top 10 Superman list today. For Tomorrow deals with the fact of the entire world basically, pausing or blinking out, something like that, and he has to deal with the responsibility of the world. The main reason I've had trouble digging into Superman so much is less Superman completely by himself, but in the greater scheme of the DC universe, the fact that he doesn't bump into, the Green Lantern Corps or any other sort of forces like that more always bugged me, because I felt like with him having such a grand scope, he never should be completely tackling anything alone. There should always be forces, and there should be more political leanings, I guess, more points of view coming in and making more shades of gray that he has to find the right answer to. And I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, as opposed to keeping it simple.
Right.
Which is a lot of stories now, they just keep it simple. Keep it simple, keep it clean.
Well, and that's what...
Because that would get complicated if you he's flying around Earth, and of course, Earth is what? There's like in the case of Green Lantern, there's 4 Green Lanterns that are responsible for Earth for some reason.
Yeah.
You know, how often would he come into conflict with those guys, or whatever? You know.
Well, yeah, and Superman, I mean, as much as he's on Earth, he also has adventures and deals with stuff in space. I mean, by all rights of the Trinity, he should be the sci-fi component. He should be dealing with all this crazy spatial stuff. And as you see in All-Star or almost anything else, he's kind of like a scientist level sort of thing. I always thought Superman should be a touch more Star Trek than they ever really seem to play him. Maybe I just haven't read the right run, but that whole idea of coming from this utopic standpoint and always trying to do the right thing and trying to balance that out. So it's less about what he can or can't do by physical limitations, but what he will or won't do by his moral standards.
Right.
That seems to be the bigger play. Because if you can do anything, what do you choose to do? That's all that matters at that point.
Right.
Right. What's that called in Star Trek? The first prime directive.
Prime directive.
He needs a prime directive kind of thing to play with.
Yeah, they should give him some sort of like level. Yeah, I mean, Amanda Waller cracking down on him for like, you shouldn't be interfering here because you're causing a problem by helping in the short term. The long term creates a problem. So stuff like that, right?
Right. Well, Greg Pak in Action Comics was playing with that, beginning to play with that before the doomed crossover event hit, at which point I stopped reading it. But from what I hear, I was made a good choice. So it feels like there's writers here and there who could do something with it. Whether Greg Pak will be able to get back to some of those issues about Superman and his moral choices and things.
And then ultimately if DC editorial is going to allow them to tell that kind of story. That's part of it too. Is DC editorial interested in telling that kind of story? Because if we're going to tell that kind of story, I become then more inclined to read Superman. If that's the kind of stuff that we're going to broach. But
I don't know that they minded him telling that story. They just interrupted the story because they want constant events.
Well, so obviously it wasn't a story that they wanted to have told because they decided.
Well, they probably tell him, well, you can tell it later. Okay, because he was in the process of telling,
right,
working up an interesting moral situation.
Well. To undermine my own point here, there was that Adventures of Superman issue written by Max Landis that got under my craw.
Right.
That was dealing with all this, but in a way that made
where Superman said he would kill, right?
Right. Yeah.
I think we lost you for a second, Matt, so I'm not sure what you said.
I just said, yeah. It was a poorly executed story, and no matter what you do, what you're trying to do, if it's not done right, it ain't gonna be good.
Right. That was a poorly executed story, plus it was extra bad in the fact that you had the writer prior to that was all over the internet bitching and moaning about how the Man of Steel movie was and how it ended and all of that, and then he basically plays into the same crap that he was bitching about in the movie. So at least that's one of my issues with it. Outside of the story itself, just that made it set extra bad. I noticed looking at the comments that people want to talk about Red Sun. Has anybody here read Superman Red Sun?
Oh, definitely. Have you guys?
I haven't.
I have not. I have a copy that I haven't read.
We're going to lose our comic book cred by saying that we haven't read that. Since my understanding is that's one of the better alternate Superman kind of stories, right? Because basically, right, the premise is he crash lands in Russia instead of Kansas, right? So he grows up communist.
Yeah, he grows up with communist values, and because he is Superman, that takes precedence. It's kind of crazy because I mean it's like a 6-issue mini, and that one could have easily gone for 12. And I can't tell you how many 12-issue Superman origin retellings there are that aren't creative at all.
Right.
But it's a crazy story, and it plays with a really core idea. Like, it's something that, like I was saying, there's all these different Superman origins. I don't know how many you guys have read, but each one kind of takes at least one component and plays with it. This one is a lot more creative. But there's kind of a basic Superman formula to go to, and it seems like so many people want to go back to the origin. Even in All-Star Superman that's there, the only component that All-Star Superman changes to really make its story to base around is the fact that it's going to be a final thing. It's dealing with his death. And not in a death of Superman kind of way, but in a poignant, well-written one. But Red Sun's brilliant because it's also that it's an Elseworlds tale, so they're free of capitulation. They also have Batman with the Russian hat and that whole deal. But showing that, like, he's doing what he believes is right based on the values that he grew up with. So suddenly you change his moral setting and you completely change the character, but in so many ways it's still the same character. They also kind of played with that in a mini called True Brit, which was written by one of Monty Python's alumni. But that one didn't quite take off. And oddly, the comedic timing wasn't really there in that book. But it was basically written like a BBC comedy, but Superman. I don't know.
Hadn't heard of that one.
Yeah.
I'll have to look that up.
But there's a lot of play with the origin. I mean, like, even in Superman Batman runs, they play a lot with both of their origins. And, like, one of the more famous runs of that was, like, kind of swapping those two famous origin stories and playing, like, if the characters were dealing with that kind of thing. And then you have, like, a lighter Batman and a darker Superman, and them playing off of each other like that. It's such a divisive thing. It is literally comic book mythos. It's that idea of the modern day Greek gods sort of thing coming out, which when you throw in Wonder Woman really compounds it, but
right.
I don't know.
Well, the Man of Steel movie a lot of that was about the backstory, the origin. Smallville is kind of like a long, drawn-out, many seasons origin of Superman.
Well, Smallville's also kind of like more of a modern take on the Superboy run, right?
Right.
Partially, yeah, but it's also about the peeling away the onion of who Superman is, and who his father is, and all of that kind of stuff.
With a lot of CW moments thrown in. I guess it was
Well,
W.
yeah. But if you look at the Uber story, to me, it's about peeling back the onion of where he comes from, who he is, and what he is going to become.
Mm-hmm.
Tangential to all this, my thing with Superman has always been that I don't like his supporting cast very much. Jimmy Olsen, Perry White, Lois Lane. But I did love them in All-Star Superman.
I was going to say, how can you not like Jimmy Olsen?
Well, they rarely do interesting things with him.
Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane had their own books for years.
Yeah,
those books were just kind of joke books, right? One day, Jimmy Olsen turned into a giant lizard, and the next day, Lois Lane gets intensely overweight, or she turns African American.
Right. They're just kind of, unfortunately, a lot of times they were just the consistent victims in the book, weren't they?
Well,
right. They're too often viewed as props, I think, and people don't think deeply about most writers don't think deeply about their character.
And don't get me wrong, I like Lois Lane. I like. There's lots about Lois Lane that I like as far as her as a character, but rarely is she written effectively like she should be. I mean, the way they bill her as being this reporter that she is and stuff, if they write that right, she's a great character. She's a strong, female cast that should be around, I think. I am way more pro Superman Lois Lane than I would ever be Superman Wonder Woman for a lot of reasons. It's me having to do with Wonder Woman as Superman, but to me that just doesn't match up anyway.
I think it depends, because I was reading all these different Superman things. Lois Lane is a character that changes more dramatically from age to age than any other character I've seen in comics. I swear her ethnicity changed 3 times I was looking at her. One time she had to have been Irish by how red her hair was. Then another time I swore she was like half Asian by the way they were doing her. And then another time she's kind of the classic Lois Lane that at least I'm used to from the Bruce Timm cartoon. That's what I'm always going to consider kind of the baseline of kind of like shorter black hair, that kind of thing. But another time she had just like long brown hair and was kind of snotty and not, smart or sophisticated the way you're, I imagine, supposed to think about her.
Right.
They write her so differently. Like, what do you guys think of Lois Lane, and where does she work and not work there? Because I think that's almost more interesting than Superman half the time.
Well, I like her. I think she works best when she's challenging Superman. That's where I think she's the interesting. She's one of the things that can be put in the book to challenge him on a number of levels, personally, morally, and all of that. As she ventures into whatever she's venturing into, whether she's reporting on Superman himself, having a conversation with Superman, or she's just doing her own investigating of whatever else is there. That challenges Clark and challenges Superman. She's interesting in that way. But like I said, if she's written as the victim, like she was for a lot of years, then she just becomes this. God, get her out of the book, because she's going to be the thing that falls off the building, falls off the waterfall, falls off of whatever else. The Superman has to keep catching her. Right. She's either he's going to do something and she screws it up because she's pulling a Daphne and she's tripping and falling over something, or whatever else. Sorry to pull their pop cultures.
But no, that was perfect. That's
it's that kind of thing that to me then as Damien's saying, then the supporting cast is unfortunate because they're a joke, so.
I think though there's a bit of I think that like she's often used as someone to just sort of kick Clark Kent around and make him feel bad about himself or whatever, or appear to be that way,
sure.
Or as the person to be saved. But I think that what her primal role is really is the normal human life that Clark Kent longs for that he can't really have.
Which is weird because I never envisioned her having a normal life.
Yeah. Well, true, she doesn't. I mean, but she's a human being.
Right.
And if she's the one he loves, and if he could be a normal human, he could marry her, and they could have children, and they could just have a normal life. And you see in the 50s and 60s Superman comics about Lois Lane, it's always this fantasy of it's all imaginary stories, and if only they could get married, and all of this stuff. And it's all, I think, about this kind of longing and this loss because he is an alien and because he has too much power and everything like that, that all these things that they have fantasy about can't really happen, which is why I was always bothered when they got married. But
all right. Well,
anyway, that's my take on her, and I don't know where Jimmy Olsen fits in, really, except that they put kids in comic books for other kids to relate to.
Well, to go back to Lois real quick, I've always read her, I think, opposite the way you have, because I've always seen her as the reason he's been attracted to her is because she's fearless, basically, and that the reason he likes her and is attracted to her is the fact that she's the only woman that's more or less able to keep up and be a part of the adventures of his life and what he's put his life to. Because part of what I've always read about Superman is the reason he went into journalism is because it was one of the few professions or things he could do as a normal person that would actually still challenge him and push him and keep him tied to the human condition. And she is the ace reporter of the DC universe. So the idea of this idea that he's striving for and her being the ideal of that always matched up perfectly in my mind. That's also the reason why him dating Wonder Woman, I think, makes a sense, but at the same time, I haven't been reading that book, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, for me, the tragedy of Superman is that he can't have a normal life, as much as he wants to, and as much as he tries to represent the heartland of the United States and everything, and just sort of, salt of the earth kind of people. He's not. He's this almost godlike figure, and that he's to save all the rest of us. He has to give up that normal life, because he's constantly hearing people falling from buildings, so he can't just sit around and eat dinner.
Right.
Or something like that.
Right.
But,
He sacrifices it all. Because
There's a number of good ways to play with it, but it seems like they always back off of the good ways to play. I mean, this is just my way of playing with it, I guess, and you guys both have great ways. But nobody, it feels like a lot of the times they don't fully commit to the drama or the tragedy or whatever of Superman.
Yeah, that's another good point. Another part that I do find interesting that they always occasionally send him back to the farm, at least when Pa was still alive, whatever. And he will. Is Pa alive or dead nowadays? I don't know.
The Action
he's dead
Comics
nowadays.
run made it so that both of his parents died before he even approached being Superman, before he went to the city, and that was his impetus to kind of get into Metropolis.
It's a very strange choice.
I heard that about 3
Yes.
hours ago.
Yeah, wow, that's interesting. So, I mean, I'm used to, I remember them telling stories where he would go back to the farm and, like, he would hang out, he'd, like, try and seclude himself from the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there'd always be great consequences if he wasn't out there monitoring everything. Something would start to rise up someplace, and ultimately he'd break down, where he'd be hiding on the farm trying to just help on the farm and be a normal person, and he inevitably would have to go back, to save whatever, that wait would only last so long before he'd have to break down and go in.
I could never buy that, because there's always 5 people being murdered in Gotham at any given minute. Like, how would he not? I don't know.
Right. That's all kind of thing. Like I said, for me, most of my enjoyment of reading Superman is Superman in some other sense, that they play with him in some other fashion that was what I find fun. Whether that be obscure comics like Engine Head that came out in the very early 2000s, where Superman in that, you don't see a whole lot of him, but the way he gets used in that is one of the characters is trying to do some sneaky stuff, and he knows to do this sneaky stuff he has to basically keep Superman busy. And how he keeps Superman busy is he's literally going around, every time he sees a cat, he picks it up and he puts it on the top of a tree. And he picks it up and he puts it on the top of a tree. So that's to slow Superman down so he can get this few extra seconds to pull the stunt that he needs to pull. That's the kind of stuff that amuses me. There's a question.
Hey, Travis, who wrote that?
Joe Kelly. That's right. Yeah.
Sorry.
Good luck finding that comic book, because you got to find it in a bizarre dollar bin, because it's just not anywhere. So, but then there's a mini series with the Question, and it's mostly about the Question. The Question goes to Metropolis, and he's doing some investigating there and whatnot. And of course, that's Superman City, right? Nothing happens in Metropolis without Superman knowing about it. But there's this whole kind of Lex Luthor is hired some shamans to do some stuff, and they're doing all this underhanded work and this sneakiness type thing, and most of their communication is done in construction sites, in the porta potties, because they know Batman, because Batman's this wholesome good person. Superman is not going to look
Batman
in.
goes to the porta potties.
Right.
I'm not confused.
He's not going to use his X-ray vision to look into the porta potties. He's not going to use his super hearing to look. And so they pass information back and forth. They literally shoot stuff down the tubes, and all this stuff happens. And that's how they get around Superman while he's there. And it's just that kind of stuff just kills me. It's just awesome. It's the Question, and I don't know that it has a. It's
that's
a 62
on my list.
Series.
I didn't get that far down my list of Superman reading.
Yeah, I mean, and that's when I enjoy Superman. I enjoy Superman when he's a person attached along with whatever else is going on. That's what I like. I like him in the Justice League. I like stories that are told about him around the Justice League. Not current Justice League, but in the past.
So let's tangent off that, because most of my Superman reading has been Superman in other books. Obviously, Superman and Batman play off each other very well. Even in my Superman reading, as I was looking through random issues, the amount of times Batman popped up was pretty uncanny. In annual number 1 of probably some other volume of Action Comics, I think it's a Batman-Superman story. Or most of my exposure to Superman's been through, Justice League. Mm-hmm. And the Grant Morrison / Mark Waid / the use a run of that.
Right.
And that's where I think in some ways he shines best, because as kind of a leader in the straight guy, a lot of people look up to him, but you don't necessarily need to use him completely. But the challengers are always to his level and beyond.
Yeah.
I don't know. But on that, did you guys read, or do you have any thoughts about the time that Superman split and was red and blue? Because that's one of the most interesting Superman periods that kind of gets lost.
Yeah, I did not read.
Is that after his
That
death?
was sometime after the death of Superman, right?
Yeah, it was after the death. They were trying to spice it up because the constant problem with Superman that they have with trying to drum up interest. And most of what I know is from the initial part of the Grant Morrison run with Superman is they're playing, and I think only the blue one made it in. He has the electric powers. And they made a big deal about him struggling and trying to figure out how to use his power set and keep thinking like the old Superman, and then forgetting that he can use this other stuff, which actually is interesting because there's a nod to that in the All-Star Superman that Grant Morrison also wrote, where he uses that ability to save the ship in the first issue with this like electromagnetic field sort of thing, and save the ship like that, which is more or less a maneuver he uses early in that Justice League run.
That era of Superman, I definitely not familiar with the whole death of and the stuff that happened afterwards. Other than I know that, that like I said, that he had the lightning powers for a while and stuff like that. So
I read a lot during the death of before the splitting in half thing there.
Yeah.
But I remember enjoying the death of a lot. But during that era, they were working really hard on giving him a big cast of characters and making Metropolis more of a city full of stuff going on. I think they were trying to Gothamize it a bit. Because in the aftermath of the death of Superman, there were all these characters that came along to fill in for Superman.
Right.
And they had. They always had scenes of people in bars talking about Superman and stuff. But it seems, my overview of Superman at this point, from things I've been reading lately, is he, unlike Batman or unlike a lot of other heroes, he doesn't work as well with the modern idea of continuity. He works better in things like All-Star Superman, where it's 12 issues with a vision of Superman, and then some other story with another vision of Superman comes along, because he's more of an iconic kind of idea than... Well, I don't know. That's
every
just
major DC reboot is centered around changing up Superman. Every major DC reboot, that's a core principle of it. And so, with the New 52, what are your guys' feelings on the changes that they've made with Superman versus the more classic understanding?
Well, I'm unclear with Superman. I think when Grant Morrison first started Action Comics, I thought he was depowered, and he had a social conscience and everything.
He definitely was. In the second issue, I think it was, he makes a leap, and then he grabs onto a balloon, and then drops off at his apartment. He doesn't fly until a bit later.
But then I think when Scott Lobdell took over Superman, I didn't read this issue, but I remember people talking about it. In the first issue that Scott Lobdell did, someone measures Superman's strength and realizes he's strong enough to lift up the entire planet. And so they very quickly...
Isn't part of that, though, that Grant Morrison was told 5 years in the past? He was telling
that's part of the idea.
He's telling the prehistory, the early history of Superman, and then when he was done with his run, suddenly the modern era, the current time, Superman is now functioning. So that's why there's that jump in.
Well, that was 5 years in the past, but the Justice League one was 5 years in the past also, but that clearly had to take place before the Justice League one, so...
Well, the Grant Morrison stuff was even prior to that.
But they both said 5 years early. Sorry.
Right, I understand what you're saying.
Well,
Right.
it bugged me that they fucked up the continuity in like the first week. Like,
Well, that's a DC issue more so than a Superman issue, but
I
yeah,
know.
yeah.
We're really suffering for not having been able to get Carlos and Steven on here, really.
Oh yeah, no.
Yeah, because they have a much better grasp of the current stuff plus the history. I
Right.
think as far as
In my dipping in and out of the current stuff, I don't notice a consistency,
Mhm.
and I feel like they haven't really decided what his powers are. Carlos mentions that in the 70s and 80s that Superman had to deal with problems on an intellectual level, and I've noticed that in the 60s and 70s, well, particularly the 70s ones that I've been reading lately. And it used to be the idea that Superman had kind of a super intellect, and he was kind of a super scientist. He would
Right.
invent things and stuff. And I don't think they have that at all.
Sorry.
The super intellect is Batman, and Superman doesn't seem just supposed to be average intellect or something.
What I think's weird is my take on the current Superman is that he is an angry young man. That's my take on him, especially, granted I haven't been reading the Superman titles a whole lot. It's and I guess heavily influenced on, we were talking before we turned this on about Jim Lee's art on Superman. And it's one of my biggest complaints about the modern era Superman, between the Justice League and Superman Unchained, which I am reading Superman Unchained. He's so pissed off looking constantly. I mean, his eyes are always glowing red. He always is this kind of menacing man. And I guess I never viewed Superman as being a threat. I mean, clearly, obviously, the guy's got all these superpowers, so he is. But through all my years of reading Superman, I never would open up and see Superman and go, damn, there's Superman. He looks like a threat. Except for those rare occasions when he really was getting pissed off because things had really been going bad, or then he would get angry. But the Jim Lee Superman always looks threatening and angry. He just always looks, even when he's just happily, saving a building from tipping over, he looks inflamed.
Well, Jim Lee just doesn't know how to draw a smile. It's his style.
Even though he's smiling all the way to the bank every time I see him in a video.
Yeah, no kidding.
But well, I guess I just decided to view what I read in Action Comics as being the definitive Superman, and with until I stopped reading it because of Doomed with Greg Pak, he definitely seemed like a well-meaning young man who was trying to figure out some tricky moral issues. There was, for instance, there was something that appeared to be a monster, and everybody wanted him to kill it. And he makes the decision to make it look like he's killed the monster, and he actually brings the monster to back to his Fortress of Solitude, because the monster is actually a baby, a child. And that kind of thing appealed to my idea of what a young Superman might be going through.
In the notes for the Grant Morrison Action Comics, there's a bit there where he's talking about he wanted to kind of make him more American as a character and kind of be a bit John Wayne, like, I know what I'm doing and I'm doing the right thing, so you better be happy that I'm on the right side here, like, kind of cocky and kind of out there. But also, Grant Morrison, for most of his run there, was writing this Superboy, essentially, before he was Superman. And then he grabs the costume, the Jim Lee design costume, a bit later, and then becomes the New 52 Superman, I guess, however you want to look at that. Post-Flashpoint, that's how I should refer to it. And, yeah. But I guess to kind of steer away from that and more to the adversarial point, what are your feelings? Or first, I guess we should come up with a list. What are the Superman villains that you guys know about? Because this is interesting in comparison to, say, like, Batman.
So obviously Lex Luthor, right? I mean, that's the biggest gimme, I think. Well, you got like General Zod. Is he really? I mean,
oh yeah.
Is he a long-term villain?
Until Superman killed him.
So right, broke his neck. Yeah.
Oh no, I was thinking of the kryptonite, but
Right. And then there's the what's the guy's name? Melanto. What is his name? The guy's got the kryptonite inside of him. He's a robot.
Metallo.
Of Tallow.
And that's kind of a sad one.
Yeah. Mixelplick.
But Brainiac's a great one.
Mixelplick, Brainiac.
Let's flick, yeah.
I'm done.
The Parasite.
Parasite was the one I was going to mention, yeah.
Paraman.
What's that?
Yeah.
That was the first Superman I ever read, Superman versus Paraman. He's a recurring character that shows up. He's even in some of the cartoons. He's a cowboy who was kidnapped by a UFO and became a outer space supervillain.
I love it.
That's amazing!
Rides around through space on a winged horse.
Oh, I'm looking that up because that just sounds cool.
He has all kinds of alien technology that helps him kind of seem to defeat Superman at times.
Space cowboy on a winged
But maybe
horse.
he hasn't shown... he did continue to show up through the 80s. I don't know if he shows up anymore.
I haven't heard of him in such a long time. I think I had a hero click of him, and that's the most I've heard of him. There's the Silver Banshee, which I ran into a couple times my random issue perusing.
Oh, is that a Superman villain? Okay.
Yeah, she was a Superman villain. She popped up at least a few times I know of, and and it kind of hit that sort of like Superman level that works because I mean she's magic, so he's vulnerable, but it's also a character that kills people with a touch. Like that's a serious threat.
Yeah.
What were you showing there?
Nothing. It was. There was a period where Superman really didn't have villains. It was just all these. So that's Jimmy Olsen turned into a monster. There's also Doomsday and
Darkseid.
To me, kind of. Well, so the animated show of Superman took Darkseid and made him his major villain, which made a lot of sense because he needed something that's hard for him to go up against. And there's an episode where Superman defeats Darkseid and turns him over to his slaves, who then want to rescue Darkseid. They're so deep into their slavery, Superman can't save them.
I guess I just don't consider Darkseid to be a Superman villain. I mean, yeah, he's somebody that he's...
No, he's not, except in the TV show.
They've bumped him up against. I mean, in the Superman Batman comics, they used him enough. And
sure, they have, but I don't consider him a. I mean, he wasn't created with the purpose of being a Superman villain, and I thought that's kind of what we were talking about is the stuff that was. I mean, he.
Well, and he's an all DC Universe villain.
Yeah.
They use him for everybody and everything now.
Yeah, but you don't see Brainiac showing up in a Batman comic book like you do. You know, he's a Superman villain. You know.
Well, what about like Superboy Prime then? Does that count? Like, I don't know.
Oh, I hate Superboy Prime with a passion.
You should. He's a really bad guy.
Yeah, I understand that, but I dislike him beyond that.
Well,
what about all the spin-off stuff? What about Superboy? I read a lot of Superboy comics in the 80s because, of course, it was Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. You know, because he goes because Superboy goes forward in time. Yeah, that doesn't make your head spin around in circles. Goes forward into the 31st century to hang out with the Legion and have all kinds of adventures and whatnot. And then, of course, that means at some point he comes back with all this, you know, knowledge and everything as he then becomes, you know, adult Superman. I always thought that was really really strange. Of course, I read those books more for the Legion than I ever did for Superboy himself, but...
Right. There's no logic to Superboy. DC has all this legacy stuff of being children's comics that they just feel they have to keep dealing with. I'm surprised they didn't just get rid of Superboy entirely with the New 52.
Well, no, with the New 52. Well, even before the New 52, the current Superboy Connor,
the clone of him and Lex Luthor.
Right. That's obviously a completely different story. I don't think that falls into kids' comic or kids being the heroes so much as what this Superboy that I'm talking about from the 80s was, where he clearly was Superman in his youth, kind of a thing. So.
But having Superboy and Supergirl around, kind of, again, it's hard to have more than one all-powerful superhero there. Like when I kept trying to read Supergirl in the New 52, but like she's doing very little. They have to sort of keep her away, even though she's supposedly even more powerful than Superman.
Yeah, she's technically stronger than Superman is. Yeah.
Well, and they played her up now in the way I was talking about.
Changing the world even more.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Other than she's got a TV show and Superman doesn't, but
Oh yeah.
Whatever that's worth. But I don't know.
Well, I don't know why, but I find myself really liking Superman again. I haven't in a long time, but it started with Adventures of Superman, but then looking at old comics, the old Terra Man, and rereading All-Star Superman. I just feel fond of him.
So, have you been looking at Superman? It's like what's going to be going on with it in the future. I mean, looking at like solicitations, whatever, to see what's coming up. I mean, the Doomsday thing is done, right? And of course we're going to get past Future's End. Who's writing the book now? Who's writing Action? Who's writing Superman? And where is it going? Do you have any sense of that? Quite frankly, I haven't been paying attention at all. So.
Well, there's Jeff Johns on Superman. I assume that
that's
Greg
right.
Pak is staying on Action.
I forgot all about that. This new big team that's on Superman right now. It's, I would assume, revitalizing it to some degree with Ramada Jr. on it and Jeff Johns.
Yeah.
I haven't heard people talking a whole lot about that, though, to tell you the truth.
I think that Carlos and some other people are liking it. I think Reedham Stephen is liking it. I'm not sure about Reedham Stephen.
Does that count?
What?
But he's a huge Superman fan.
They're super fans, yeah.
I'm very uninterested in Jeff Johns doing Superman for some reason, so I've stayed away from it.
Yeah, same here.
He wrote some good stuff back when. I mean, it started with that Brainiac arc, then it was the whole new Krypton thing, and then the War of the Supermen, and it was a good big run, and it was right before Flashpoint and all that. And then he's back to it.
I keep losing audio, I guess. I don't.
I don't know. If you guys could pick a creative team right now to go on Superman and see what you want to see, who would you pick to put on that? Because I feel like that would say something about where they should head.
Huh. Sure.
I'd be happy with Greg Pak if they just stopped interfering with him and just let him run with it.
Huh.
And I was, because I had not been reading much DC, but the fact I ran out and bought Action #1 written by Grant Morrison. I had really high hopes for that. And that was kind of a shock that it just didn't come anywhere near All-Star Superman. So it's hard to say who.
Well, I think with that Grant Morrison run of Action Comics, I think he went into Action Comics thinking he was going to write one thing, and then changed his mind, or somebody changed his mind, and he ended up writing something completely different. So I don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
That change was very jarring after the first 2 issues, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. What that was. I don't know. I can't think of somebody that I would. I want to say Charles Scholl. I think could maybe write something that might be interesting. I know he's been writing Superman, Wonder Woman, and there have been plenty of people who have liked that. I almost want somebody just totally new on the book. I
feel like if you get something kind of crazy and off the beat, get a Matt Fraction, David Aja to do Superman and completely play it in a way no one was seeing it coming.
See, that would be cool. I would not necessarily them, but that kind of a thing. Just somebody take the character and go someplace with it, and be allowed to go someplace with it, would be interesting. I would be interested in seeing something like that. I think just because to me it just feels like the creative teams that are on right now are kind of spinning their wheels.
Right.
Other than what Damien said about Pack was trying to do something.
I think it's an editorial problem, really. I'm guessing they can't let someone just take Superman and go with it. They're like a bundle of anxiety about Superman, and they keep them because there's so many good stories and adventures of Superman. When it's only 10 or 20 pages, no one gets anxious about it, and they let them do interesting things.
But see, I think that's edited by other people. I don't think that's technically under the.
Right, they have a different group of editors on the digital.
Because it's the digital, yeah. So, and of course I'm the wrong person probably to even spout this piece of opinion on it because I'm not a huge Superman fan or the Superman family or whatnot. I don't think the Superman line, the super family of books, Superman, Supergirl, Superboy, I don't think any of those books are strong books, and I think that has as much to do with, or more to do with editorial than it does anything else. I think they need new vision. I think that they need to, obviously they got to follow some corporate mandates, but I think that there needs to be whoever that senior, I can't remember his name right now, that senior, who's been the senior Superman editor for quite some time now. I think there needs to be a change. I think he needs to go edit something else, and they need to find a new editor that's going to inject something else into the Super Family line. Kind of like what's happened. I think it's kind of what happened to some degree with the Batman line. The fact is that we did lose a long-term main editor there. A new person comes in, and suddenly we've got these new books with a different vision. I think that would be prudent for the Superman line too, because it's been the same editor for a lot of years.
I think because Batman gets a little more leeway because it sells so well.
Right.
But both Batman and Superman are major merchandising corporate properties, and so it's really hard to let them to loosen up their editorial hand.
Right.
But I think that's what they really need to do. I mean, I think there's tons of creators who could do interesting things with Superman if they were just given a long leash.
Well, I'm not even talking about something crazy pants. Matt's example of Matt Fraction-Aja, that's probably moving more to an extreme, right. Especially with a main title. But even beyond that, I still think that I don't know. It feels like there needs to be somebody with a vision, and it doesn't feel like there. I don't feel like there's anybody with a vision, so I'm not excited. Maybe Jeff Johns, Romana Jr., maybe that's a vision. I'm not curious about either one of those creators right now. I feel like they're both past their primes, and so I'm not interested in reading that because of that creative team on it. So
yeah. Well, and it sounds like Johns is kind of redoing the same plot that's going on in Superman Unchained, which I'm not reading either of them, but I hear people talk about their plots, and they sound like the same plot.
Yeah, I'm not.
They're both about Superman facing some kind of Superman analog who works for the government or something.
Yep, Wrath.
Oh. Well, before I jump off of that, I just want to say the reason I haven't been reading Superman of late, because I wanted to read Hell on Earth, and I liked Action Comics, but I feel like primarily, especially even before the New 52 or anything, Superman is a book where if you want to be reading the story, it's to be continued directly across, 2 to 3 different titles every time, at least once a year. And it makes it really hard to get invested in a book where I have to literally get invested in a chain every time. And I wanted to read Hell on Earth, but I was like, I don't want to drop $20 this month on something that may or may not be good. I'll pick up a trade if I hear it's all right. And I heard it was decent, so I want to pick it up, but when I can get, a trade, not a hardback. And that keeps me out of that whole universe, and that's systemic of the comics industry as a whole right now. But even Action Comics that Grant Morrison was doing is one of the few books that was let off in the New 52 as a $3.99 book. I'm like, it's good, but it's not that good, And it's like these books that I like, but I don't want to invest.
Yeah.
Wonky Ninja in the comments has a great idea of Tom Taylor and Cliff Chang doing Superman. I think that would be excellent.
Oh, yeah.
Again, if they were given enough of a lead.
Yeah, and like a book their own to just do something with for a year.
Well,
Right.
he's obviously been doing different stuff. I mean, because he's writing Injustice, right? The Injustice Gods Among Us.
Injustice is a lot centered around Superman.
Right. He's one of the main focal. He's gone, obviously an alternate reality, story there where he's a bad guy or seemingly a bad guy, or at least maybe not a bad guy, but making decisions that are based on his own personal needs as opposed to the needs of the world.
Or his own personal morals, I think.
Yeah. So, obviously
what you or I would do if we were Superman.
Right. So, and he's obviously telling some kind of alternate Superman-ish kind of stories in Even Earth 2. So, clearly somebody who has some different ideas of potentially things to do with Superman. So, yeah, that would be an interesting take.
I mean, if you want good Superman stories, they're basically out there on the fringes in Injustice and in Adventures of Superman, and possibly to an extent in Earth 2.
But then that's almost a problem, though, isn't it? That the alternate stories are what's interesting about Superman as opposed to Superman itself, or at least the alternate story is more interesting to us non-super fans of Superman, right?
Well, I think that reflects the editorial problem, that in the alternate areas, they're not with it too much.
Yeah.
Well, that's been a big thing about just comics for a long time, is Superman analogs have been a big part of comic books. I mean, look at the Majestic comics that Joe Kelly was doing. That's what got him the job on Superman. But those early issues of Majestic are some of the most crazy sci-fi concepts I've ever read, and it plays with a warrior-type Superman, but he's doing the stuff that's way out there. Or you look at Invincible, and it's taking that formula and playing with it in a slightly different way, writing in a different tone, and suddenly you get this, indie darling story out of it. Or you look at Mark Waid playing with it with Irredeemable, and the evil Superman, and
Right.
just playing with that. Or I mean, even going a little further, like Squadron Supreme or any of that, like the idea of Superman not Superman is
And I love
something
all
that's
of those,
widespread.
Superman is like the primal text of superheroes, and that's why they have problems with it as a mainline superhero. But it's wonderful to play with.
Yeah.
It's just trying to keep him on the straight and narrow in your continuity with all the proper characterization and everything. It's hard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, but I mean, playing with the basic Superman power set is really interesting. Actually, one of the more interesting takes was with JMS when he was doing Rising Stars. I mean, there's a Superman analog character in there, but there's this whole interesting take where the main character of that book was given this power where he's not the most powerful character, but he can kill any one of them. He's the most deadly. And so playing that with the most powerful versus the most deadly. And that's something that I feel kind of defines Superman. Superman is not a super deadly character. He's a very ultra-powerful character. But then you have to tie that line between that humanity thing we're talking about versus, especially when you get to the higher levels, like Superman's on a god level. The super god, the Ubermensch, the Superman, like short of being omnipotent and all-powerful, like his whim is his will, and so what can you do with that idea and play with those stories? That's where I think it can get interesting again too. But that's more of the old crazy Superman where he's like, punching planets out and doing all that crazy stuff.
Yeah.
But it's hard to play with that within continuity because it's inevitably going to go too far. It's inevitably going to change the world so radically.
Continuity.
So they have to kind of dance around it in the modern continuity idea.
Well,
I'm just stuck on the idea that he should be a non-continuity character, I guess best, as a myth and an archetype, not as not in the mighty Marvel manner that
Yeah,
everybody wants to do now.
he's part of the Trinity, though. You can't take him out of continuity.
They took the Sentry out of continuity, right? Why not?
Not the same.
What does the Trinity really mean? I mean,
It's
because
something that
the
DC
only
made up.
well-defined one there is Batman.
Right, it's something that DC made up. It sounds good because pop culture wise, those three characters are iconic. There's no denying that outside of comic books, those three characters are huge. So that's why they coin it. That's why they use it. And that's why they keep trying to drag it
Right.
through. That's why they'll every so often they write a comic book about the Trinity because of that. Because
They're
people are
the
hung
holy
up
trinity of our bank account at DC Comics.
on basically. That's right.
Well, what if they rework the Trinity though? So it's it has to be Batman, but then like the Flash and Black Canary, like
No.
I don't know.
No.
I'm uncomfortable with the use of the word Trinity unless you're really gonna play with that too. I mean, why call them the Trinity unless you want to make some religious
Oh, yeah, I guess.
game out of it?
There's three of them, that's why.
Well, then doesn't the Phantom Stranger have to be in there now?
Oh God, let's start. No, just put
And
the
if you're
Scotty in
playing
there.
with the religious Trinity, the Trinity is also one, right?
Right.
Are the Trinity in DC Comics all really one? They're all different versions of God. They're all different versions of Dan Didio.
Oh no.
None of them are bald though.
I'm sure Dan is not bald in his dreams. I know I'm not.
Oh.
Where are the bald superheroes? I need those. I guess there's Lex Luthor, but that's
They're all
that's
he's
where
a
we
hero
go with
he's a
bald
hero
ones.
right now.
Yeah, he's helping out Batman, right?
There are
I
bald
should
superheroes.
go to the Justice League for the bald superhero, I guess.
There are bald superheroes.
Who else?
Well,
John
I guess
Jones, I guess.
I guess technically right now Black Lightning isn't. For a while he certainly was. So was
Luke Cage, I guess, is bald.
Luke Cage
Bald and
But I
shaved
assume that's
is
just a
different.
shaved head.
and Cypress Hill. It's not Hill. Cypress, the policeman who was the Spectre for a while. He was bald.
It's just like there's no bald rock
Steel?
stars. They all have hair.
Steel, isn't that his name? Steel.
So it's all the black guys, not to.
Yeah,
Right,
it does sound that way,
because
doesn't it?
Sports figures all shave their heads.
Right.
All right. Well, I feel like we're tears. Are there any other Superman stories you guys wanted to bring up, or?
If somebody can answer the question for Wonky Ninja, he's asking, was Lois Lane's father ever introduced before the New 52? I do not know.
Superman's father? Yeah, he's the military guy. They introduced it later, but she was a military brat. They brought that component in.
He was definitely in Smallville every now and then.
So he was in the comics before the New 52, though.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Okay, because I don't remember him prior to that. So.
I mean, he was a huge component in the Mark Waid retelling of Superman Birthright, which was interesting. Interesting because when I think of Superman, the first creator I think of is Mark Waid, because he's like a self-professed Superman aficionado, read every Superman story. Right. And I find it bizarre that his one take to get a miniseries on Superman is this run-of-the-mill retelling of the origin, working together like the Krypton stuff with Lex Luthor, and half of it is just like playing in Smallville and running off of the Smallville show.
And that's why sometimes you shouldn't let superfans write books for those characters they're super fans of.
Well, but I mean, with the way he's been writing Daredevil, can you imagine him applying some of that to Superman?
I have the same thought, yeah. It seems like the way he does Daredevil would make him perfect for Superman.
Yeah. But, like I said, I think sometimes if you're such a fan of something, sometimes you can't get out of... You're stuck in the medium and can't I don't know. I think lots of times there are creators who are like just crazy fans of a character aren't necessarily the best people to be producing it because they.
I also
maybe
feel like
he
this
was
was
asked to
written
do
during Quake's
Smallville.
creative run. Sorry, go ahead.
Maybe editorial at the time made Wade do a sort of Smallville connected kind of
Could
thing.
could be.
Probably. Yeah. So yeah,
Okay,
creator I want on Superman is Mark Waid, because who could do it better?
I'd love to see a Rick Remender Superman
Oh my god.
and have him apply his gonzo science fiction imagination to Superman. That would be exciting.
But then who do you want on art? Ticini?
Sure. All kinds of artists can do Superman well, except for Jim Lee.
Except for Kirby, because obviously they cut his head off every time Kirby drew Superman, right?
Right.
I'm still fascinated by that.
Yeah.
The editorial hated Kirby's Superman face, so every Superman book he did, they go back in and redraw the head of Superman.
That was crazy. I think DC kind of hated Kirby, even though they hired him away from Marvel.
Which is funny because they continuously go back and use Kirby's stuff.
Right. Well, everyone who came afterwards was huge Kirby fans, but I think the people who were working at DC right at that time considered him like the ultimate emblem of what they did not like about comic books. The sort
Was
of
he impossible to work with or something? Like, I don't know.
No, they gave him a big contract and they let him be his own editor and everything, but supposedly back in their editorial offices, they felt betrayed that the company had hired him.
Because he's Marvel. He was Marvel.
He was Marvel, and they all, even though Marvel was slowly beating them, they all sneered at the whole Marvel style of doing things.
Right.
And Kurt Swan was their ultimate idea of what a comic book artist should be.
Yeah.
And I like Kurt Swan now, but I hated him back then. And they're very, very different artists.
For sure.
So to stick Kurt Swan heads on Jack Kirby figures is very funny.
Yes.
Or sad, depending on
I
your
need
view
to
of it.
see that now. I don't think I own a single comic like that, though. I don't know where I'd find it.
If you look at the Jack Kirby Jimmy Olsen run, it's full of redrawn
Yeah.
Supermans.
Yeah.
All right.
Unfortunately, I can't send you digital copies of that. DC needs to get a lot more of this classic stuff into their digital library. Although,
They need to do one of those Marvel things where you can pay a fee.
well, there would be that. That would be nice too. But except for Commandy, they don't have much of that classic early '70s stuff in digital anywhere. I'm just trying to torture Travis.
Yeah.
What's up?
Well,
if I had a lot of money, I would buy Travis an iPad just
just to see if I'd use it.
try and get him to read digital comics. But I'm not rich enough, unfortunately.
Well, certainly, there's some advantages to digital when it comes to all that old stuff that you can't get. That, like in my case, where I live in the middle of nowhere, I can't go wander off to a dollar bin or whatever and buy,
Right.
all the 80s and 90s comics that I missed that I might want to look at cheaply. That would potentially be a way to do it. I get it. It's just not my thing.
Well, and with All-Star Superman, I just had a whim to read it, and I just pressed a button, and then I had it.
Yeah.
Now, granted, I still want the physical copy, but it was very handy.
Yeah.
But I do sympathize with your worry about it hurting the way comics will be created in the future. That's a problem.
So anyway, I'm looking forward to Superman. I'm looking forward to hearing what people have to say about All-Star. Looking forward to all these new people you've got reading the book, hearing their versions of it. You got quite a mix of people. Obviously, some that are really that I know are really big fans, like Carlos and Steven. And then there are people that you have on that list that surprise me that they're on that list to be reading the book. So I'm really curious to hear their takes on it too, because it just strikes me as not being the type of comic books that they would be reading. So I'm fascinated to hear what they all have to say. So I have to say this is one of the more exciting events that that the community has kind of hosted that I'm actually interested in hearing about, because I've read those books, but I don't have a wide breadth of knowledge on Superman, or this is the longest conversation I have ever had about Superman in my entire life. So like I said, I'm curious. I'm actually kind of excited by the whole thing, just because it's not something that normally I talk about, and I'm always interested to look at the new subjects.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I think it's a great book for using to talk about Superman, because it really, whether, arguably other Supermans are good or bad, this one definitely, everyone seems to respond to it, or everyone so far. And I too am excited about the variety of people talking about it. So we'll see.
I'm super excited about this one. I'm a little sad I didn't get an issue, but like,
sorry.
But no, it's the perfect book for this kind of project, because each issue stands on its own, and you can really dig in, and it gives people a platform to kind of say their bit about Superman, I think, and really draw people in. I really feel like this has the potential to be the biggest project since the Watchmen one, and so I'm super excited, and wish I kind of chose that over Dark Phoenix, but whatever.
Dark Phoenix was very good. It was a very good choice.
I just wanted to do something Marvel. I wanted to mix it up, was my main thought. So
yeah, nothing could really beat Watchmen. I mean, everything was kind of downhill after that in terms of what to choose.
Well, you could do V, but
I don't think.
No?
I mean, I like V as for Vendetta, but I don't think of it as something that juicy to chew on the way Watchmen is.
Ooh, I don't know, man. Like,
issue to issue, really, Matt. Issue to issue, you think that could be? Well, probably a subject for another time, but
yeah, I think V for Vendetta is really just one story. There's not layers.
All right, so signing off for now. Everybody have a good night. Any other closing bits? No?
Well, special thanks to Travis for being a sport and jumping on, even though he is not.
Thank you so much for the two of you being here. Otherwise, this wouldn't have happened.
And thanks for Matt for all of his ideas and input.
Yep.
For both this and the previous video.
All right. Well, good night, everyone.
Bye.